Baltimore's 10 worst public housing projects of all time are presented in this video. Charm City. Or is it Harm City? Body More. Murda Land. The notorious high-rises. From Lexington Terrace, portrayed as Franklin Terrace on HBO's The Wire, to the infamous Murphy Homes, better known as the Murda Homes. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, the crack epidemic crushed BMORE, and the projects were right at the center of it. The buildings were transformed into open-air drug markets, and lucrative profits fueled brutal turf wars. Gangs seized control of courtyards, hallways, and stairwells. Most units were occupied by single mothers with at least 2 children, but vacant units left behind by fleeing tenants became trap houses, havens for dope dealers armed with semi-automatics, Uzis, and rifles. In 1993, Baltimore broke a tragic record with 353 homicides, many occurring in the properties featured on this list. But amid the chaos, these projects are also home to resilience. Individuals and families whose lives are filled with extraordinary struggles. Entire communities fighting for survival, rising above setbacks, turning pain into power, and remaining determined despite their circumstances. This video will explore their journeys and take a deep dive into the ongoing efforts to transform Baltimore's public housing landscape. We'll examine the harsh realities faced by residents like Freddie Gray, who lived in the Gilmor Homes, where he was arrested and thrown in the back of a police van. Which gangs and kingpins turned Murphy Homes into the Murder Homes? Was Lexington Terrace really as brutal as they say? Without further ado, here are the 10 worst Baltimore public housing projects of all time. We'll start with the high-rises. Number 1. Lexington Terrace. Many would say Murphy Homes was the most dangerous project in the city, but Lexington Terrace was just as bad. It was completed in 1959 and contained 677 units in 5 high-rise buildings and about 20% low-rises. Located in West Baltimore's Poppleton neighborhood, the complex was originally built to provide affordable housing to low-income black families, but by the 1970s, poor maintenance, crime, and neglect led to rapid deterioration. Residents lived in deplorable conditions. They had to deal with rat and roach infestations, leaking pipes, peeling paint, cracked plaster, and broken windows. Outdated heating and sewage systems made everyday living uncomfortable. In the winter, stairwells were so cold that the railings were coated with ice. The chutes were constantly clogged with trash, at one point 10 stories high. Sometimes, residents couldn't even get in or out of the buildings. Dope pushers, armed with semi-automatic weapons, would surround the doorways, not allowing people to enter or exit the complex until their business inside was finished. In the 770 West Saratoga high-rise, on a stairwell wall, there was an ad for the building's 7-day-a-week drug market. It even specified prices according to type and quantity. On the adjacent wall, there was an explanation. If making money is a sin, Lord forgive us. By the 1990s, Lexington had a 25% vacancy rate. Dealers and users would congregate in the empty apartments, some of which were vandalized and stripped of their windows and plumbing. Lexington served as inspiration for The Wire's Franklin Terrace Towers. It's also the boyhood home of Nathan Bodie Barksdale, the real-life kingpin, whose name lives on through characters like Avon Barksdale and Bodie Broaddus. Decades before creating The Wire, David Simon was a police reporter for the Baltimore Sun. In a 1987 article, Simon explains that Barksdale was the head of a drug ring, supplied by Little Melvin Williams. The crew controlled some of the most lucrative territory in the city, including Lexington. Then came Warren Black Bordley, another Lexington native, whose gang waged war against rivals, leaving a trail of bodies behind. By the early 90s, a group of Nigerian dealers, who called themselves the Jamaican Black Mafia, took over Lexington, pushing $40,000 worth of heroin per day from the high-rises. Residents lived in fear until 1993, when they brought in the Nation of Islam for security. Crime dropped, but it was too late. In 1996, the towers came crashing down, but the project's stronghold still followed many of its youngest former residents, a group of which established a gang called the Lexington Terrace Boys, also known as the Jugs. Terrace life became their slogan, and they used LTB in tattoos and graffiti. They sold crack in the area where the project once stood, which was still an open-air drug market years after the buildings were demolished. The death toll that authorities attribute to the gang is long, including one victim, a product himself of Lexington Terrace, who vanished in 2002 after warning his mother that if anything happened to him, his friends from the neighborhood probably did it. The 3 leaders of LTB were indicted in 2002. They refused to snitch on each other and were convicted. The case marked the first time that U.S. prosecutors in Baltimore have asked a jury to recommend the death penalty since 1998. To avoid capital punishment for their clients, defense attorneys put on trial the housing project itself. Jurors who decided the men's fate heard about the broken elevators, defeated residents, and the cycle of violence. In the end, they chose to spare them from death instead, deciding that they should spend the rest of their lives in prison. In 1999, the town of the Terraces was completed, transforming the former site of Lexington Terrace into a mixed-income community. Number 2. Murphy Homes. The George B. Murphy Homes was completed in 1963. and contains 758 units in 4 14-story high-rise buildings and numerous low rises. Located in West Baltimore, surrounding Perkins Square, the complex was built to provide affordable housing for low-income black families. Instead, Murphy became one of the city's most dangerous projects, earning it the nickname Murder Homes. During the crack epidemic, dope pushers and users from all over the city, and even from Washington and New York, flocked to Murphy. Shotgun-toting drug dealers post up at the doors of Murphy, roam the streets and playgrounds, sometimes killing innocent bystanders in gun battles. They bought off security guards and would shoot out the windows of the security booth. Lexington Terrace legend Nathan Barksdale eventually extended his grip to Murphy, where he brutally tortured 3 people in an 11th floor unit. That earned him 15 years in prison. By the late 80s, the Stanfield organization took over. The crew was about 50 deep, led by Tamira Stanfield, who's only 25, and his half-brother Marlo Bates. The Kingpins served as the real-life inspiration for the Wire character Marlo Stanfield. Tamira was convicted of murdering one of his own dealers, Robert Cowman Hilton Bay. The incident occurred the week before Christmas, 1985. Cowman was clearing the lobby of Murphy out because he didn't want many people there to attract the attention of police. The problem came when he didn't recognize Stanfield, his boss. He told him to get out the lobby. Stanfield was displeased. So, he snapped his fingers, and young boys on his payroll, at 50 cents a day to stash guns, passed a revolver hand to hand until it reached Stanfield at the bottom of a lobby staircase. Without a word, Stanfield pumped 6 bullets into Hilton Bay's head. In 1996, FBI agents surrounded the high-rise on Argyle Avenue to arrest a man charged with 7 armed robberies and shootings. When he spotted the police, he scaled the building, climbing from balcony to balcony before disappearing into a vacant apartment. Officers ran up an interior stairwell, but couldn't catch him. He's lucky the platforms were able to hold his weight. Murphy's balconies were poorly designed and were known to crack and crumble. A few years prior, a 12-year-old was killed when a giant slab of concrete broke off a balcony and crushed his skull. As time went by, it became more and more difficult to find tenants willing to live in the buildings. In 1993, there were 25 vacant apartments ready to be rented. But after making offers to the top 300 applicants on the waiting list, the agency was not able to find a single person willing to live in one of those units. The odds against ever getting out of places like Murphy are long. The hurdles tenants have to overcome are enormous, with crime and hopelessness as constant backdrops. NBA legend Carmelo Anthony is one of the few who defeated those odds. As a child, he spent long days dribbling his basketball on the cracked asphalt that surrounded the high rises. The WB, tattooed on his left shoulder, is a constant reminder of his West Baltimore roots. In 2022, Mary Frances Holmes sadly passed away. She was known as the great-grandmother of Murphy and raised her 14 children at the Argyle Avenue high-rise. Mrs. Holmes resided for more than 20 years at the 14-story complex and pushed the detonating button to dynamite the structure in 1999. Heritage Crossing, a mixed-income community completed in 2003, now stands where the infamous Murda Homes once reigned terror on Baltimore's west side. Number 3. Lafayette Courts. Lafayette Courts was completed in 1955 and contained 816 units in 6 high-rise buildings plus 17 low-rises. Located in East Baltimore's Jonestown neighborhood, the project was originally built for black residents. Lafayette started out like a dream, brand new high-rises with harbor views, fresh-cut flowers, and clean stairwells. But by the 1970s, that dream had decayed into one of the city's most feared housing projects. Muggsy Bogues, the shortest player in NBA history, grew up here and experienced unimaginable brutality during these years. At the age of 5, he was shot by a stray bullet, and at 12, he witnessed a man get beaten to death with a baseball bat in the courtyard. And yet, every night, he shot jumpers on the project's basketball court until almost sunrise. In the 1980s, Maurice Peanut King controlled the drug trade at Lafayette and eventually all of Baltimore. He bought 18 mopeds, and his lieutenants gave them to kids as young as 10, and then paid them up to $500 a week to run heroin for him. A former Lafayette resident says, "A van used to pull up with dozens of bikes for the youngsters." Anthony Grandison also ran a drug crew operating in the project. A turf war between the rival gangs sparked a wave of murders. By the 1990s, Lafayette was a living nightmare. Elevators reeked of urine and constantly broke down. Tenants would ride them in darkness because vandals pushed out the lights. Kids would ride on top the cabs, a dangerous game known as elevator surfing, until a 9-year-old fell 8 stories down a shaft. Trash chutes were so backed up, garbage filled the hallways. One day, a tenant heard crying in the chute and called for help. Firefighters ripped through the trash and found a newborn baby in a plastic bag, with its umbilical cord still attached. He survived. In 1995, hundreds watched the implosion of Lafayette. It was a moment of hope and new beginnings, marking the end of what many knew as crime and drug-infested projects. Pleasant View Gardens, also known as PVG, a mixed-income community, is located on the land where Lafayette once stood. It was completed in 1998 and contains townhouses plus a senior building. But decades later, residents say the same issues are back. The drug dealing, gunfire, and neglect that plagued Lafayette Courts is destroying PVG. Number 4. Flag House Courts. Flag House Courts was completed in 1955 and contained 487 units in 3 high-rise buildings and numerous low-rises. Located in southeast Baltimore's Jonestown neighborhood, near Little Italy and the Inner Harbor, the project was originally built for white families. In the early years, life at Flag was wonderful. There were dances, bingo nights, a swimming pool, and even harbor views for many units. One police officer plus his dog was able to patrol the complex without any help. But by the 90s, that once peaceful life had unraveled into a breeding ground for poverty, crime, and despair. More than 85% of residents were on public assistance. Many had come from shelters. Drug users filled the stairwells, and dealers ran the elevators. Former resident George Thomas moved into the project in the 60s and witnessed the long decline but never felt threatened by it until the 90s, when he was shot outside his front door as he and his 3 grandchildren returned with ice cream from a nearby store. Danger at Flag House spared no one, including the police. In 1992, an officer was ambushed in a 3rd-floor hallway. The suspect wrestled his gun away and shot him in the head at point-blank range. Sadly, the incident left him partially paralyzed and nearly blind. A month earlier, a sniper had opened fire on a group of officers from an upper floor of a Flag high-rise. They had to be rescued by an armored vehicle brought in from Prince George's County. In May of 1993, the Baltimore Sun assigned a reporter to spend an extended period of time at Flag. The resulting 3-part series by Michael Fletcher was chilling. He said drugs and guns had transformed the project into a place where violence and death are so familiar that it resembles a war zone. Addicts converted vacant apartments into shooting galleries. Gun-toting dealers controlled the stairwells, often pointing their weapons in the faces of people who surprised them. The crackle of gunfire was routine. He described the physical deterioration, sewage backups into bathtubs, huge populations of mice and maggots, walls rotted with water damage. Even people desperate for affordable housing turned down opportunities to move to Flag. The city called in the Nation of Islam for help, and surprisingly, it worked. Crime plummeted, but maintenance issues kept piling up. Kids were often hurt in elevator accidents or burned by exposed steam pipes, and tenants were struck by cabinets that would collapse off walls or doors, falling off closets. Children were sickened by asthma attacks, triggered by the heating system's sharp temperature changes, and they were cut by glass and poked by hypodermic syringes left lying on the untended grounds. It was clear the place couldn't be saved. In 2001, Flag House's towers came crumbling down. Albemarle Square, a mixed-income community, rose in their place. Number 5. McCulloh Homes. McCulloh Homes was completed in 1941 and contained 434 units in about 30 low-rise buildings. By 1971, the city added over 500 more units in a towering extension known as McCulloh High-Rises. Located in West Baltimore's Upton neighborhood, the project was originally built for black families. If you've ever watched The Wire, you've seen McCulloh Homes, whether you realize it or not. Nicknamed the Pit on the show, McCulloh served as the filming location for the low-rise housing project, where D'Angelo Barksdale managed the street-level drug dealing in the courtyard from an iconic orange sofa. In 2012, Brandon Sims was eating crabs in McCulloh's real-life courtyard on Waddy Court when a man walked up to him, pulled out a gun, and shot him in the leg. He tried to crawl away, and the shooter fired a bullet into his head. When nearby projects, like Lexington Terrace, were demolished, dozens of displaced families were relocated to McCulloh. When you put one project into another, crime increases, and that's exactly what happened. In 2013, a group of men, holding T-shirts over their faces, opened fire on an individual holding a baby on McCulloh Street, just off Martin Luther King Boulevard. The man who was hit by the gunfire fled with the child in his arms to the University of Maryland Medical Center's Midtown campus. Tavon Bulldog White, a member of the Black Gorilla family also known as BGF, grew up in McCulloh. While locked up in Baltimore City Jail, Bulldog made headlines nationwide for running a drug operation from behind bars. He got 4 corrections officers pregnant, 2 of them even tattooed his name on their bodies. And then, there was the tragedy no child should face. In 2012, a young boy came home to find his mother tied up and murdered. The killer, her boyfriend, was still inside the house. He attacked the boy, tied him up, and fled the scene. Years later, an armed security guard accidentally lost his life during a prank gone wrong. He jokingly pointed his empty gun at his friend, who reacted by fatally shooting him in the head. The project's high-rises were torn down in 1994 and replaced with City View at McCulloh. The redevelopment of State Center may include transforming McCulloh's low-rises into a mixed-income community. We're done with the high-rises. The rest of the projects on this list consist of low-rise buildings. Number 6. Cherry Hill Homes. The first portion of Cherry Hill Homes was completed in 1945. The complex contains a total of 1,597 units, making it the largest public housing development in Maryland. Cherry Hill is located in South Baltimore, boxed in by water, highways, and railroad tracks. And that's no accident. During World War II, Black Southerners flocked to Baltimore to work in the defense industry. This population surge caused a post-war housing shortage. White residents began protesting because they didn't want blacks moving too close to their neighborhoods. So, the housing authority pushed African-American families to Cherry Hill, an isolated peninsula, surrounded by environmental hazards like industrial plants, the city incinerator, and polluted water. Despite the odds, Cherry Hill became a close-knit, self-sufficient community. The town center had everything you needed: an A&P supermarket, clothing stores, plus the Hill movie theater. Most importantly, the community had a sense of pride. Residents used the acronym RICH, which stands for Raised in Cherry Hill. But then came disinvestment, followed by the crack epidemic. Crime and violence skyrocketed. By the 90s, two gangs emerged in the area: UDH, or Up the Hill, and DDH, or Down the Hill. UDH controls the neighborhood's high point, while a gang known as Coppin Court is based in the Down the Hill area. Their turfs intersect at Round and Bridgeview roads. Other gangs in the area include Hillside, Little Spellman, and the Lakebrook Circle Boys. Even Jada Pinkett Smith was drawn into the dope game. In her memoir, the Baltimore native reveals that as a teen, during the crack epidemic, she started selling drugs in Cherry Hill. After being robbed at gunpoint, she decided to leave the streets behind and chase Hollywood instead. Not everyone got that chance. In 2009, when Doris Dangerfield saw a body in front of her house, she called to her 21-year-old son, Angelo, who she believed was in his bedroom sleeping, to have him check things out. There was no reason to think that it was him lying on the sidewalk. Involved in various youth leadership programs and due at work soon for his apprenticeship with the city housing department, Angelo Dangerfield was a model for his peers. But after slipping a pair of shoes on, his 55-year-old mother got to the front door, just in time to see police rolling over the body of her son, who had been shot in the chest while walking his pit bull, Princess. Cherry Hill may have been built to keep people out, but what it really did was keep residents locked in. A 2020 transformation plan suggests that Cherry Hill Homes will eventually be replaced with a mixed-income community. Number 7. Poe Homes. The city's very first public housing project, the Edgar Allan Poe Homes, opened in 1940 and contains 298 units. Originally built for black families, the project was located in West Baltimore's Poppleton neighborhood, just steps away from the former home of legendary writer Edgar Allan Poe. In a classic scene from The Wire, a member of the Barksdale gang, more familiar with the housing projects than the poet, recounts a conversation with a white tourist and his wife who are looking for the historic landmark. He's like, "Young man, you know where the Poe house is?" I'm like, "Unk, you kidding me? Look around. Take your pick." After Lexington Terrace was demolished in 1996, the violence didn't disappear. It migrated. Drug crews, including Warren Bordley's gang, and decades later, the Lexington Terrace boys set up shop at Poe. Broken elevators, moldy walls, and neglected maintenance were the norm. But things hit a new low in 2019, when the entire complex went without running water for over a week, all because the city installed more efficient toilets that didn't work with Poe's failing infrastructure. When the water finally returned, the pressure was so low, the toilets still wouldn't flush. Enough was enough. In 2024, residents were relocated as part of the city's Poe, Poppleton, and Holland's transformation plan, a massive redevelopment project aimed at turning this historic complex into something livable again. But for many, the damage had already been done. The Poe Homes may have been Baltimore's first housing project, but for decades, it also ranked among the worst. Number 8. O'Donnell Heights. O'Donnell Heights was completed in 1943 and contained 900 units. Located in southeast Baltimore near Dundalk, the project was built for white factory workers during World War II. By the 1970s, the property had barely changed. It remained all white for more than 20 years, earning it the nickname Hillbilly Heights. Authorities called the National Guard when integration took effect in 1967. Future NBA legend Dominique Wilkins was one of the first black residents to move in. He learned to play tough by battling older kids on the courts of Patterson Park and Sparrows Point. Toward the middle of his NBA career, he returned to the area and built a basketball court for kids growing up in his old neighborhood. By the 1980s and 90s, O'Donnell Heights was overwhelmed by the crack epidemic. A section of the complex, known as the Hole, was one of the most violent parts of Baltimore. The city tried to fight back by altering the directions of the streets, to confuse dealers and their customers, and to make it easier for officers to see the criminals before being spotted by lookouts. One-ways, headed east, were changed to westbound, and those headed north were changed to southbound. It didn't work. The location made it a drug hotspot. Just one turn off I-95, and you were in the Heights. No traffic lights, no cameras, and no police visibility. Most of the buyers weren't even from the city. They were suburban addicts. Things got worse when crews from the demolished Murphy Homes and Lafayette Courts high-rises were relocated to the Heights. When you move one project into another, chaos follows. Then came the Nickel Boys, a gang from Dundalk, who pushed $40,000 a day in heroin and coke, selling $5 nickels to anyone who stepped foot on Gus Ryan Street. In 1997, a tragic mistake took the life of North High School's quarterback, Rocco Cash. He was gunned down in a drive-by, mistaken for a rival. By 2001, O'Donnell Heights was so violent that pizza delivery drivers and newspaper carriers refused to enter. Taxis wouldn't come near the perimeter at night. Even cable and phone lines were cut by dealers who didn't want residents calling the cops. Demolition of O'Donnell Heights began in 2009. The site is now being redeveloped in 4 phases, with Keys Point, a mixed-income community, rising in its place. Number 9. Gilmor Homes. Gilmor Homes was completed in 1942 and contains 571 units. Located in West Baltimore's Sandtown, Winchester neighborhood, the project was originally built for black families. Gilmor Homes is where Freddie Gray lived, and where he was arrested in 2015, and where the viral video of him being dragged to a police van changed the world. He died a week later. His spine was severed. His death sparked intense riots, the likes of which had not been seen in Baltimore since the death of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968. But the problems at Gilmor didn't start or stop with Freddie Gray. For years, it was a fortress for gangs and drug dealers. The 6 walk-up buildings were especially bad. Dealers used the stairwells to stash drugs and guns, and police couldn't see what was happening from the street. In 2012, Romish Vance was sentenced to 70 months in prison for participating in a drug conspiracy at Gilmor. If you recognize his name, it's because he appeared on The Boys of Baraka, a PBS documentary that followed the journeys of high-risk students from Baltimore sent to boarding school in Kenya on scholarship for 2 years. But the school closed after his first year there due to security threats. Upon returning to the United States, Vance dropped out of a Mississippi boarding school, left his mom's home, and gained, then lost, a spot as an extra on The Wire before returning to the streets. In a chilling federal case, 3 generations of one family, a grandfather, father, and son, all pushed crack together from Gilmor. Then came the scandal. In 2015, 7 women filed a $1 billion lawsuit against the housing authority claiming Gilmor maintenance men demanded relations in exchange for basic repairs. 2 workers were eventually fired, but the charges were dropped after the city paid out millions. In 2023, a man was shot and killed just inside his doorway on Delano Court, while neighbors were still getting ready for their morning commute. The same year, the city finally demolished the 6 notorious walk-ups, including the one on Bruce Court, with the original graffiti memorial of Freddie Gray painted on its brick exterior, where mourners gathered after his death and laid candles on his birthday. Today, only 475 townhomes remain at Gilmor. The city plans to transform the vacant space, left behind by the demolition of the walk-ups, into a park for the community. Number 10. Perkins Homes. Perkins Homes was completed in 1942 and contained 629 units. Located in southeast Baltimore between Fells Point and Little Italy, the project was originally built for white families. The Bloods controlled Perkins until 2008, when the Black Guerrilla family, also known as BGF, took over under the leadership of Eric Brown. While jailed, Brown issued a no bloods order, helping BGF dominate Maryland's prison system and sparking efforts to expand into the streets, starting with Perkins, where his family lived. The Bloods had lost community support due to predatory behavior, making it easier for BGF to take over. Their rapid expansion across Baltimore eventually led to a federal RICO indictment in 2011. In 1994, a team of federal and city officers raided Perkins, breaking up a crack cocaine ring that was run by 3 Dominican men, who had ties to a Central American cartel. Years later, drug busts at the nearby Flag House and Lafayette Courts high-rises only pushed the dealers deeper into Perkins, where crime spiked and violence exploded. One of the most heartbreaking stories happened in 2019. Victoria Glover was putting her son in the car outside the complex when her husband, Corey Bowman, pulled out a shotgun and murdered her in broad daylight right in front of their baby boy. A few days later, police surrounded Bowman's apartment. Before they could break in, they heard a blast. He'd taken his own life with the same shotgun he used to kill his wife. Perkins Homes was demolished in 2023 and replaced with a mixed-income community called Perkins Square. Honorable mention: Douglas Homes. Douglas Homes was completed in 1941 and contains 393 units. Located in East Baltimore's Old Town neighborhood, just steps away from Johns Hopkins Hospital, the project was originally built for black residents, and through decades of hardship, they formed a tight-knit community. But Douglas also became the site of some of the city's most traumatic headlines. In 2021, the courtyard was the scene of a high-profile murder. Dante Tater Barksdale, the nephew of drug kingpin Nathan Bodie Barksdale, was shot in the head near a busy bus stop. But Dante wasn't in the game. He had turned his life around and was working as an outreach coordinator for Safe Streets, trying to stop the violence that once defined him. He'd even been named to Mayor Brandon Scott's transition team. His death sent shockwaves through the city. But the violence continued. In 2019, Police chased a suspect into the complex. When they finally caught up, they claimed he pulled a gun. Officers opened fire, killing him in the courtyard. A weapon was found at the scene. That same year, a young mother of 2 was murdered at Douglas, just years after her children's father had also been gunned down. In the background of this, gentrification, in 2019, residents began protesting against rumors that Johns Hopkins University wanted to buy the complex and bring its own private police force to patrol the area. The housing authority has renovated some units and even teamed up with the Baltimore Ravens to build a new playground. But crime remains, and the future of Douglas is uncertain. It sits near the site of Flag House and Lafayette Courts, 2 former high-rise projects that were demolished and replaced with mixed-income communities. Many believe Douglas is next. But the people who call it their home? They're not going quietly. Honorable mention: Latrobe Homes. Latrobe Homes was completed in 1941 and contains 669 units. Located in East Baltimore's Old Town neighborhood, the development was originally built for low-income white families, but eventually became a breeding ground for crime. From 1999 until 2007, a notorious gang known as the Latrobe Organization dominated the project's drug trade. Their reign came to an end after prominent members were locked up for murder. Anyone familiar with Latrobe will tell you that McCulloh Court is cursed. On Labor Day weekend 2016, Delaney McLeod lost big at a dice game. Furious, he left, then came back with a gun. Caught on surveillance, he opened fire in broad daylight. He missed his target, but he hit a 61-year-old woman in a wheelchair and 2 of her grandchildren, ages 6 and 4. Sadly, the violence didn't stop there. In just a few years, McCulloh Court saw multiple homicides, brazen daylight shootings, and a terrifying carjacking. 2 men, armed with rifles, robbed a Lyft driver in 2023, in the middle of the afternoon. But the most haunting story? It didn't involve drugs or gang violence. It involved a dog. 3 masked men burst into a woman's apartment. They stole her cash and jewelry, then shot her dog, Lena, in the mouth. The bullet tore through her throat, but somehow she survived. Latrobe has also been linked to criminal activity, tied to those sworn to prevent it. In 2017, a Safe Streets employee known as Fat Relly was accused by federal authorities of running a drug ring that supplied the project while collecting a paycheck to reduce violence. Recently, the housing authority started taking bids to renovate vacant units at Latrobe, but there's been no official word on whether it will be transformed into a mixed-income community like many other projects on this list. For now, Latrobe Homes remains standing, and so does the fear that comes with it. The properties included in this video are more than just public housing projects. They are a symbol of what happens when a city turns its back on its most vulnerable communities. Until there's true investment in people, not just buildings, history will keep repeating itself. Did you live in one of these housing projects? What was your experience? Share your thoughts in the comment section below.